Onika, what's the number one piece of advice that your mother gives you about your mental health?
Oh, Lord, that's easy. You got to pray the cray away, girl. That's what she always tells me. But she's a little bit more woke now, so she gives me some other advice too, but it's mostly pray the cray away. We do our devotion in the morning, just in case.
It's the second part of your mental health.
Yeah, that's my regimen. That's a part of my regimen now. Pray the cray away.
All right.
Hey y'all, it's Onika
and JR,
and you are dishing with Dainty Dish. How you doing today, JR?
I'm doing well. I mean, it's nice. It's the afternoon. The sun's out. I'm finally getting some sun in my place.
Ooh,
yeah,
nice.
Yeah, so I'm doing good. Doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing all right. Work's doing, its thing. It's good. It's good. It's fine. But other than that, I don't think I really have much to say. I'm excited about our guest today. We have a guest. It's All Kinds of Crazy Wednesday. I just want to get into it. Why not? It's All Kinds of Crazy Wednesdays. And we have a guest today. I'd like to introduce you. And this is going to be a little complicated, ladies and gentlemen. We have JR to my left, and we have JJ to my right.
Hello.
Okay.
Hello.
Hey,
Thank
JJ,
you so much for
how you doing?
Me. Good. Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here today.
Perfect. And JJ and I know each other from the MDAO. He did my Peer Support 1 training course with me.
Yeah, that's right. And I it was a really great time interacting with you. And I feel like, just teaching that course, it's really exciting to see like how people are very passionate about mental health. And I definitely saw that in you in the course. So I'm excited to be here.
Appreciate that. So we're just going to get right into it, okay? We like to talk about the Wonder Years. Remember that Fred Savage show with the girl, Pepper or Piper, whatever her name was? He was just like so in love with her. Yeah. We're going to talk about the Wonder Years, way back when. Awesome. So tell us a little bit about yourself back in those times.
Yeah, so I came to Canada from the Middle East. I was born in a country, a really small, tiny island called Bahrain. Mm-hmm. My parents are from India, so that's probably where I would identify my cultural background is from India. But I lived the first 6 years of my life in Bahrain, and I came to Canada 1996. So really, I just identify as a Canadian. I know, my roots and my background. It's all very much Canadian, and so. My parents came here. We had no other family here. We had really not a lot of friends here either. So it was pretty much just a family of 4 from India and from the Middle East that was just trying to find a way to make it work in Canada. And I experienced like a ton of challenges doing that. Right, I wasn't able to identify with the Canadian culture at the time. I didn't know how to present myself, and when I did present myself in a certain way, it was kind of frowned upon, and kids at school would like giggle about it and stuff. So yeah, I think just back in the day, I think I had a pretty challenging childhood that definitely impacted my whole perspective at the time, and had an impact on who I was in that early part of my life.
Okay. And you said you experienced bullying as a child. What was that like? What was that? Go into that a little bit more for me.
Yeah, you know what I think now that I think about it, a lot of the bullying probably stemmed from just not knowing how to present myself in a culture that was very new to me. I had a bit of an accent when I came over to Canada as well. The customs were very different, just how people interacted in school, and I was interested in things that the rest of my schoolmates weren't interested in, and so a lot of that stuff, I think people were singling me out just because I wasn't able to relate to them. And I think kids can be really, really tough.
They're horrible.
Yeah, they're real. They don't have that bigger perspective, right?
They don't have filters.
Yeah, absolutely. And I lived that, and I felt that. For the first several years of my life growing up here, until I finally understood that I kind of needed to assimilate to a different culture, which meant suppressing some of my Indian roots and just accepting this new culture that I was in. I don't know if that was the right thing to do or not, but at the time I felt like it protected me.
And what was it like at home? Now you're having the Western life there, and then an Indian culture at home. What was that like? Did you tell your parents what was going on with the bullying, or?
Yeah, I didn't talk to my parents about that. I didn't. Yeah, I felt like I was living two different lives. You know, like I was living a life at home that my parents expected of me, and then when I would go to school or hang out with my friends, it would be a completely different life. Like I would live like the Canadian life outside of home, and then go convert back to the Indian life back at home, right? And my parents didn't kind of know any different, but for anyone who knows, like the two cultures are extremely different in almost every single way possible, and so my parents had a lot of expectations for me in school and work and just growing up that were kind of I wouldn't say like forced upon me, but they were just expectations that I had to meet. Mm-hmm. And that didn't jive really well with what I was experiencing just outside of home.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we talked a little bit about childhood. What were your teen years like? Was there still that pressure from your parents or pressure in school?
Yeah, I think the pressure started to kind of diminish a little bit. I started to identify like who I was, and I started to create my own identity that I was comfortable with, and I was comfortable with talking to my parents about. But I think, and I'll never kind of forget this, that I feel like my childhood years, like that kind of bullying that I was experiencing at school, like always just had an impact on me for the rest of my life. Like, mm-hmm. I was so young and I was just soaking everything up and absorbing everything that, any negative or bad behavior that I saw, I also absorbed, and it definitely affected me in my teenage years as well. I felt more comfortable. I felt more comfortable being a Canadian and identifying with Canadian like interests and values. But I definitely felt like some of that bullying even later on in my teenage years.
Okay. So, and how were you doing in school at the time?
Yeah, I think I was doing well in school. Like, academically, I didn't really have any issues, but just like socially, I feel that there were, my mental health at the time. Like, I didn't even really understand what mental health meant at the time, but mm-hmm. I definitely, like, now that I think about it, that was impacted socially in school. Just again, like that whole identity piece and trying to live by two different sets of values, right? And a lot about like, I'll never forget the word, like someone taught me about cognitive dissonance, right? Mm-hmm. When, you're living one thing, but then you have a different perspective in your mind, right? And it really challenged like my well-being. And I definitely felt that in my teenage years for sure.
Okay. Did you do post-secondary as well? Yeah,
I went on to university, and I it's kind of interesting. Like my parents, it's one of those expectations, right, that my parents had at the time, and it's very interesting. Like people from India, you're either an engineer or a doctor or a lawyer. Like there's no social worker, or social service worker, or child and youth worker.
None of that.
Yeah, no, and which kind of sucked because like I expressed some interest in other things, and I never got a chance to really live them out because, even if I had that slight bit of interest in that, it would get suppressed by these expectations of, going into medical sciences or whatever it was. Mm-hmm. And so I ended up going to school for biology and neuroscience and health studies.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, and that's something that I probably would have, like, if I would have made that choice on my own, I would have never chosen that program. And
yeah.
even to this day, it's not something that I have any interest in whatsoever. Like I'm I've forgotten a lot of the topics as well. But like that was when I really felt the pressure of like having to kind of live up to someone else's expectations, right? And I don't blame my parents one bit at all. Like they were some of the greatest like influences in my life, and I really love the impact that they had on me. But I don't even think like, a newcomer coming into Canada, it's really hard for a parent to understand like how they're impacting their child in a completely different world, like growing up in a completely different mm-hmm. environment. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So when did you start noticing you were having challenges? Was it in post-secondary school? Yeah,
I would definitely say it was in post-secondary school. And again, if I were to think back, like definitely my childhood and teenage years like impacted that. I just didn't recognize it at the time. But yeah, for sure in post-secondary school, again, it was like dealing with like this cognitive dissonance, right? Like to living up to a complete different set of expectations that I had of my own. And then I had to kind of just like own that, right? Even if I didn't feel comfortable in it, I had to go to school and study a program that I had no interest in, but I just had to accept it. And I felt like, there was no other option. And then I would retreat back to my home and feel like the real self, right? Like I'd feel my real identity at home. And then, again, like having to leave home and go to school and put on a mask on and present like I'm a different person. And it just didn't impact like school, and it impacted like how I interacted with my friends, like the work that I had, the goals that I set. Like I really felt like I was living two different lives, and it was a big struggle for a big part of my post-secondary years. I didn't really know like who I was supposed to be, who I was supposed to present as, and what my goals and expectations were, like, because they were all just out of whack, right?
It sounds stressful.
Yeah, it was super stressful, like, because those are like, I think, probably some of the most formative years in like your life. You're trying to figure out like what you want to do for work and how you want to live, and to not even like have an identity to ground yourself with, like, it's tough, right? I feel like, probably kids that are a lot younger, they start to, or maybe in high school, you start to figure out what it is that you want to do, or, you start gravitating to a specific interest, but, and maybe that helps. But at that time I didn't have any of that, right? I was living expectations of my parents, living expectations of my friends, and like, work and family, and my own expectations were just getting suppressed and diminished and like thrown away, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
And what did that, like, did it lead to anything specific, like that suppression? You know what? Like I became really good at like masking my emotions, right? I became like incredible at like not showing people that I was suffering, right? And that I was like, coming home and like just like crying and being emotional. No one knew that. My family didn't know that. My friends didn't know that. Because I was really good at pretending like everything was great, right? If someone had, set of goals or expectations that threw at me, I did a really good job like accepting that and just like proving myself and living that. But in reality, I was really hurting. But yeah, I think like it suppressed my ability to release my emotions. I didn't know anything about self-care at the time. So I didn't know that it was important to care for my own interests and my own values and beliefs. And to work on myself, right? Just individually do things that I love to do and things that I wanted to do of my own. So I just like kept like following through with other people's expectations. And I think, kind of answer your question, like it just really suppressed my ability to communicate what I was feeling, right? And I did a really good job of hiding that. But ultimately it led to just, worse like mental well-being, mental state. Until I feel like I exploded at some point, right? I was going to ask you about that, because every person that I feel goes through what you've been through, and I'm Guyanese, I was born there, so I kind of know what you're talking about, has that moment where they crack. Yeah. The facade you can't keep it up anymore. No matter what you try to do, you're crying when you're supposed to be happy. You're happy when you're supposed to be crying. Like you crack. Yeah. So do you remember what that was for you?
Yeah, I think it came a lot later. I feel like a lot of my mental health challenges at the time were brought to light through the work that I was in at the time. I really finally understood that, okay, maybe there's something like not going right here in my mind or in my life. And all that was revealed to me at work. And I worked in a couple of environments, but, one of them was like extremely rooted around like toxic masculinity, right? There was this expectation that if you work in this particular environment, that you don't have challenges, you're not there to like talk about your problems, you don't show any sort of weakness, and you put on this persona like you don't have any struggles that you're facing, right? And so that particular environment, I kept taking that in. I kept working in that environment. I kept suppressing those inner struggles that I had until I finally, I'd start to feel pain, right? I actually felt like physical pain throughout my body. I felt it in my head. I wasn't able to really do anything productive. I could spend like hours and hours and days just in bed, like sleeping, and just going out and, going to work in the grind, coming back, working in that toxic masculinity environment, coming back home and just, just sheltering myself in my bed, right? Until, finally, I realized like all that pain was leading to something like physiological. I wasn't eating right and wasn't taking care of myself, and I was crying a lot. And, you know, I ended up having suicidal thoughts at the time as well. And it's really interesting because I was feeling all this pain and I thought like, oh, it's just mental health. I can read a book and I'll make it all better. I'll listen to like a TED talk or something and make it better. Yeah.
I love that.
You know
I
what?
love that.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I feel like that was like what I was experiencing as I was growing up. That mental health is just something that you can fix on your own. Like it's a self-help kind of mechanism that you can follow and address it. And so I tried all of that stuff. I tried reading books. I tried like talking to people. I didn't really talk to people actually. I definitely didn't do that, but I read a lot of books, like just tried, searching things on the internet, and none of that stuff worked. And then the pain just became severe, and I said like, well, I've tried it all. I've tried reading all the books, tried watching all the videos. That's not working. So what's the point of like living anymore? And so then I had those like suicidal thoughts on a regular basis, and it would just make me sink even further into that rabbit hole, right? Just thinking about not wanting to be around anymore until, I attempted to like harm myself on a couple of occasions, and that ended up bringing me to the hospital at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto.
Okay. Well, let's talk about that experience. This is CAMH, right?
Yeah, CAMH. CAMH was the last actually resort. I ended up trying to explore just other avenues through like walk-in clinics and just different psychiatrists. I ended up seeing with some counselors at the time. The place I was working at, they referred me to through like a phone counselor that they had for all their employees. None of that stuff ended up working out. I found that it was like so tough to just find someone that was I was able to connect with and
right fit.
Yeah, it was so challenging. Like that itself, like just made my mental health condition like deteriorate even further. And so, after that first round of finding people, I was like, I'm done. I don't want to look for anyone else, because it's stigma. It's very traumatic, right? To have to retell your story multiple times to multiple people and then not get any result out of it. And so I gave up. I stopped for a bit, for probably about a few months, until I ended up becoming, having a lot more suicidal thoughts. And at one point I remember being at home. I was on my kitchen floor in front of a kitchen drawer with a bunch of knives in it. And that situation was probably like the big triggering point of my entire life. It was probably 1 a.m. And I was just sitting there like crying with like a knife in my hand. And I ended up just grabbing my bag. I just, was in my pajamas. I grabbed my backpack. I shoved some stuff in there, and I just found my way to the hospital. And on my way to the hospital, I just continued to think about like different ways that I could just end it all, like taking the train and thinking about things that I could do on the subway platform. And so I ended up being at the hospital, and it was probably such a difficult time just even trying to check myself into the hospital. I had to get rid of everything that I had on me. I ended up just seeing so many like crazy things, just a lot of police officers in there, a lot of screaming, a lot of yelling, a lot of people not telling me what was going on with my own admission. I sat there for probably over a day. I sat in the emergency room, like literally on a chair in my slippers and with nothing on me, and there's no bed to sleep on. I sat in a chair for an entire day with no one telling me what was going on. And so I remember, I had enough at that point. After that first day, I was like, no one's talking to me. I'm just sitting in a chair. It's super uncomfortable, seeing a lot of things that just triggered me even further. That I tried to leave, and on my way trying to like leave the exit door, which is really difficult because it's not easy to leave that place.
No.
They pressed this alarm, and all of a sudden I had I'd say probably like 6 or 7 like security guards like grab onto me, and then grab onto each of my limbs and like kind of bring me over to a stretcher, and they restrained me onto the stretcher. And I remember, for whatever reason, I'll never forget this, there was this like reflective piece of material on the ceiling. It wasn't a mirror, but it looked like a mirror because I could see myself like restrained on this bed, and all I could see was just like tears coming down my eyes, and I was crying, and I could watch all of this stuff happen because for whatever reason, again, there was this like reflective piece of material on the ceiling. And I remember them like pulling my pants down and just sedating me, like putting an injection in my butt and sedating me, and that was one of the most traumatic experiences of my life, to like be restrained, every part of your body to not be able to move around, And all I was doing was crying. Like I wasn't being aggressive. I was just crying. I'm like, I need to know what's going on. Like I just, no one's talking to me. No one's giving me any expectations or timelines. And then from then on, I ended up getting admitted into the mood and anxiety inpatient unit at CAMH.
And how was that experience for you? I know obviously the admission experience was very traumatic, but how's the actual experience in the hospital? Yeah,
it was probably the like one of the best experiences of my life. Like just a very, very different reversed experience from what I encountered in the emergency room. I spent about a month in that unit, and it was really rewarding because it was an entire month of just focusing on myself. Right, I didn't have to worry about like cell phone bills or rent or groceries or laundry, anything like that. In fact, all that stuff was taken away from me. I had no ability to communicate with the outside world. I didn't have access to my phone. Like for most of the time, if I needed to call someone, I could call someone. But anyways, I didn't have any of those stressors, any of those worries. All I had was like an entire month to just focus on myself and identify like what was going on in my mind, talking to professionals, psychiatrists, psychologists, recreational therapists. There were pastors there as well, occupational therapists, and I loved it because I'd never spent that in my entire life. I'd never spent that much time like focusing on like me, just bettering myself. I got introduced to like recreational therapy, which I found was incredible. Something as simple as like just going on a walk, a mindfulness walk. I never realized like how incredible it was just to go to the park and like walk and like look at the trees and smell things and like talk to people and smile and like, look at people interacting and just being aware of what was going on in my surroundings. I'd never done that. No one ever told me like how valuable that was. No one ever taught me that. I never did it. But yeah, something like that, like just a small thing like a mindfulness walk really had a huge impact on my life. I got exposed to some, various types of prescriptions that I could take that would help me, kind of get back on track. And I ended up getting a blood test. First time I even realized I could get a blood test to see if there's anything like, kind of out of whack in my blood in terms of my hormone levels. Yeah, absolutely. And so they realized, like some of my vitamin B12, for example, is very low. And I didn't realize that affected my mood. And it was so low that they had to like give me tablets to get it back up to a regular level. And I wasn't getting that in my diet. So they gave me some medication that helped with depression at the time. They diagnosed me with major depressive disorder and borderline personality disorder. And so they gave me some medication to bring me back, help me to be able to pursue other things, like other forms of therapy, which was really like a tough experience because those medications had different impacts on my body. I had to keep trying different medications until I could find the right one. And that wasn't fun whatsoever. But once I found the right one, I was able to like engage in all the other social kind of activities that were there. And I loved it. I loved like every minute of it. And eventually I got discharged from the hospital after a month staying in there.
Okay. And where were your parents at this point? What was their reaction to you taking your backpack and getting a CAMH on your own, and like what's their reaction to this?
Yeah, I'm giggling a bit because like they don't know. They still don't know. I don't know if they're going to listen to this podcast.
Still don't know.
Yeah. You know what? My mom actually passed away a few years ago from cancer, and like that was yeah. Thank you. That was one of the things that really. Made my mental health challenges really known was the loss of her in my life. But yeah, my dad definitely doesn't have any clue that this had happened. I think he knew like something was up because I wasn't around for a month. I wasn't able to talk to anyone, but yeah, they weren't there. And I think it kind of relates back to that question you asked earlier about just like my parents, and I didn't feel comfortable telling them, right? I didn't feel comfortable telling them that something was going on with my mental well-being. I had no issues telling them I had like physiological things, like, when I went to my family doctor just for regular, like, aches and pains. But when I had like an ache and pain in my brain, like in my mind, like I didn't feel comfortable to tell them at all. So I just, I pursued that kind of treatment without letting them know.
That must have been difficult.
Yeah. I think, I think it is, because, at least I would like to think that, a child should be able to like find comfort in their parent. Right. And I know that's not the case for everyone for a variety of reasons, but, out of everyone in the world, I feel like a parent should be someone that should be able to provide that level of comfort. And I think my parents, they were, and they still are. I just didn't feel like they were the right ones to talk to about my mental health, just because maybe of their lack of understanding. And so, yeah, it was really difficult. It was like one of the most traumatic episodes of my life, and I didn't have my dad around at the time. Luckily, I had my brother, who's someone that I was able to find some sort of comfort with, and I was able to communicate with him. But yeah, it was definitely a very, very difficult time, but I had to deal with it kind of on my own.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what was post-hospital life like?
Yeah, but I
like
feel
getting
like,
back into things, there's always that weird feeling like you're in kind of outer space almost.
Yeah. That, it's a really good analogy. I felt like that because it's, you come out of this hospital, and I was really like emotional leaving the hospital because I had everything at the hospital there. I had, everyone to kind of take care of me. I developed a lot of really great relationships with some amazing people, and I felt like super safe in that environment. And I'd never felt anything like that outside in the community up until that point ever in my life. And so to leave that space, I did feel like I was this like outer space kind of environment. Like I was scared. I was scared to go back out in the community. I was, it started to trigger me a little bit, right? Like I don't want to end up back in the hospital. I didn't have the resources out there. But my team at the hospital provided me with an exit plan that included a therapy called dialectical behavior therapy, DBT. And again, something I had no idea about whatsoever until I finally took it. It was a 7-month course. I think it was about 3 days a week. So I ended up like dedicating like that 7 months of my time. I wasn't working at the time. I just like full time did this course. And it changed my life. It absolutely changed my life. I learned a ton of stuff about, just different ways of thinking, what impacts my mood, how to deal with my mood once it's like, negatively impacted. Just self-care was another huge thing I had no idea about until leaving the hospital or while I got into the hospital. So I spent 7 months like focusing on myself. I just, building more resources, relationships, different tools to address my mental health. I was seeing a psychologist and a psychiatrist as well. So a lot of like comfort there, leaving the hospital. But what I did realize, one of the biggest kind of things that I realized was like how difficult it is for someone to live in the community that's facing a mental health challenge and not have like resources available to them, and also to see like how much of an uphill battle it is for someone with a mental health condition to like assimilate with the rest of the community. And how like the rest of the world is not like conducive to supporting people's mental health. It's so cutthroat. I found like everything was so competitive, and people always have to kind of one up someone, if, whether it's like one upping people in life or just like in materials, right? If you buy something and you realize like someone else does something better, then you feel like inferior, right? And I just became more like cognizant of all of that stuff that I was like prior to the hospital, like,
it mattered.
It mattered to me, and it affected my mental health. And I left the hospital and I realized like, man, this is stuff that like, I can't allow to take control of my life again, right?
Oh, okay. I guess I'll jump in now. Yeah. Sure, why not? So you talked about that job in that toxic masculine environment. I know we're not going to go into the details of it, but as a man, how did that affect you? Having to put aside all your specific, internal concerns and pressures, and just actually take on the pressures of the other people, I guess, your subordinates, I guess, we could call them?
It was really tough, I find like a lot of my previous places that I've worked at, and just in general as well in the workforce, people are very focused on like targets and deliverables and bottom line and sales and things like that, but people don't actually focus on the team members that are actually making all that stuff happen, right? The ones that are achieving all those targets and deliverables and sales and things like that. And so I was working in environments like that where I had to like suppress personal life and emotions and care for other people. And it was really tough, and when people even said like, well, it's okay to talk, right? It's okay to talk to people. It's okay to let them know what's up. Like that wasn't actually the reality, right? Like that it was just kind of a facade. And, I was thinking about this earlier. different employers. And in this particular case, the employer that I worked at, the government had spent like millions of dollars on mental health strategies and mental health campaigns. But despite that, I saw people like struggling and suffering on a regular basis. But all this money was spent on these like supposed things to make people feel better. But in reality, it was like a poster on a lunchroom wall, or like an email that got sent out, or a policy. But none of this stuff actually played out in real life. And I thought, just even you mentioned like being a man, like a male figure in that environment, and it was even more tough, to show people that I could like cry and to like be emotional. Even to this day, I kind of like struggle with that sometimes. I just think the society like kind of values more masculine individuals, right? Masculine men, like, very like toxic masculinity. Like, you just see it in like, in sports or in movies and music, all that kind of stuff, that, people that show a higher level of masculinity are the ones that are more valued. And, I thought I was supposed to uphold that, right? Like even just to hug someone. I remember like I never used to hug people if I felt really sad and like emotional. I'd feel super awkward, like asking the person, can I just get a hug? Like, are guys even supposed to do that? Right. That question would come through my mind all the time. And, it's sad because I see the reality of that, like on an everyday basis. Like right now I work in the social services, field. And, I think that was also another big trigger in my condition at the time. I had to come into work and suppress all of my personal struggles and listen to everyone else's challenges, right? Listen to all my clients and all the difficult stuff that was going on in their life, and be their sort of rescue person or their safety, while suppressing all of my own stuff. And then eventually, that kind of kept getting bottled up until it finally exploded. And, and I still work in the social services sector, and I still think that it's an environment where the people that are providing the services are not always cared for, not always valued, and there's still a lot of stigma, still a lot of toxic masculinity as well that like is in that particular environment. And it was tough. It was tough for me to communicate my thoughts and my feelings, and it was also tough to get help because of all of that.
You speak about toxic masculinity. Onik and I have talked about this term.
We've dished on this.
We've talked about this term in the past. But how does toxic masculinity affect the stigma of mental health? Because I know that there's from our experience on this podcast, a lot of the women that have been on the podcast have been very open about sharing in their experiences, and to some degree it almost came natural. I would say, but you suggest that there's been a lot of struggles for you. Like what is the fact that toxic masculinity, I guess, has on men that aren't toxic?
Yeah, it's so tough. Those men that aren't toxic think that they're inferior then, right? And I was in that position as well. Like, because I at some point in my life ended up being very emotional, and I felt comfort in like releasing my emotions, through crying or just kind of being sad and like talking to people about it. I didn't have a lot of people in my life to talk to, but when I did experience that, I thought that I was inferior, right? And I was comparing that to like stuff that I saw on the media, and just movies and things like that we mentioned earlier, and it made me feel like I wasn't as man enough as those other individuals, right? And I mentioned something as simple as like a hug, right? Like you can see women hug and embrace and kiss and just console each other. And that's not really an issue, right? But when a guy does it, guys feel uncomfortable, right? And they make statements like, "Oh, it's just like a brotherly thing," like, or they use terms and phrases that they have to use to like defend what they just did. It's always like they hug someone, they're like, "Oh, no homo" or something, right? Like you back in the day, they used to say that kind of statement.
I remember
like,
that one.
Yeah, and like why, like it was like a defense mechanism, right? And it ended up, I feel like for me, it ended up just devaluing the hug itself and like the comfort that I found in another male figure, right? And even to this day, like it still kind of impacts me. I feel it's something that I can't avoid, like just watching TV or like on Netflix or whatever. Like it's something that you always see that kind of male figure that gets put on a pedestal, right? That toxic masculine environment that gets put on a pedestal, and it makes me, sometimes makes me, it doesn't make me uncomfortable, but I think it makes me just think twice about how much I want to share out there. But I feel like, I've gone through this entire experience, and I've taken on this like kind of personal responsibility to help other people, right? Like help the male figures in my life, like realize like, no, it's okay to cry, and I cry too, and it's okay to hug people, and it's okay to talk about your feelings, because at the end of the day, we all experience it. We're all human beings, and we need to be able to talk about that. It's just society that's showing us like, no, maybe it's not okay, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what kind of, I guess, in addition to that, what kind of advice do you give to men that you meet in order to help them improve their mental health? Like what's like one piece of advice that you would give to a man?
Yeah, I feel maybe not necessarily like advice, but I think like the best thing that I personally can do, and I think that other people can also do as well, is just be like super genuine and authentic about the stuff that's going on in your own life, right? Because I could meet an individual, a male figure, and just prescribe a lot of things to them and tell them to do things and dictate a lot of stuff. But if I just show them and highlight some of my own experiences, like I also cry and I'm also emotional, and I also talk to people about my feelings, and it makes me feel good at times, right? A lot of the times when I talk about those things, it makes me feel comfortable because I feel like I've communicated them in a way that helps me. A great example is I just ended up one of the jobs that I worked at, a client had walked into my office, and it was a male figure, had a very like toxic masculine kind of persona to them. Mm-hmm. Felt like they had to like uphold this perspective that they put out for the world. They were in and out of the correctional system, very tough exterior, and they came into my place of work, and they were crying, and they just started to cry, and I just gave them a hug, right? And I feel like that kind of advice, like I had the ability to give this person a hug. We had a good relationship, and we knew each other's boundaries. I just gave this person a hug. I didn't sit there and like kind of give them advice or dictate things to them. I just like show them like, man, it's okay. It's okay to like embrace each other. It's okay to cry, and what you're doing is completely fine. And if someone did that to me, back in the day when I started experiencing some of this stuff, I probably would have thought different, right? But what I had instead were people that kind of dictated things to me, and like told me to go pursue, like go to the gym or just go play sports or like go grab a beer. Like those are things that are
such guy answers.
Yeah,
guy answers.
Yeah, but no, absolutely, and no one actually like sat there and just said, just cry it out with me, man. Like, mm-hmm. I don't want to say anything to you. I just want to like hold you and you just cry it out. Like if you want to yell, you want to argue, you want to fight, like just, I'll be here, and like, I'll be emotional with you. Right. And man, if guys could do that, like
it'd be amazing.
Yeah, it would be incredible. And I think guys can do that. Like, and they want to, like, I feel like men want to do that. It's just, but there's stuff in the way, right? There's like societal pressures that get in the way. And then people think like, no, maybe I don't want to do that. Maybe it's not right to do that, right? So, yeah, I think that would be my biggest advice, is just being super genuine and authentic about your own struggles with someone that's experiencing mental health challenges, and it makes the world of a difference.
Leading by example.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I had a question for you.
Yeah.
When you were talking about all the avenues you went down during your journey, with mental health, I'm just curious, why was CAMH and the doctors like the last instead of the first? Like, was there like a thought behind that? Like, why read a million books first instead of going to see a family doctor? Or was that a cultural issue? Was that like, what was that?
Yeah, I think that was a cultural issue for sure. That would probably be one of the biggest reasons of why I chose to pursue that last. In very like eastern parts of the world, and certainly in India, mental health is something that's not talked about often. People can talk about all sorts of physiological conditions, but mental health isn't talked about. And in some cases, some people in countries like India go and make statements like mental health isn't a thing here, right? Like mental health challenges aren't an issue. But if you were to really dig deep inside, like, look through news stories and different reports, you see that people are committing suicide in those places at really alarming rates, because it's not talked about, and because people think like it doesn't exist in that country. So if you're experiencing it, that's just, you know, a one-off thing, and people end up choosing to, you know, end their lives for it. So anyways, I mean, I ended up thinking that, kind of embodying that same mentality, that what I was experiencing wasn't really a valid health concern. It was something that, you know, I could just read a book or, you know, talk to the right person or whatever and find the answer and, you know, solve it myself, right? I didn't need to see a medical professional for it. I didn't need to, get blood tests or get on pharmaceuticals or anything like that. But in reality, I was completely wrong. And, you know, it was just... The sad kind of thing is that a lot of the medical, not a lot, I'd say definitely the first few mental health professionals that I encountered perpetuated that stigma as well. Mm-hmm. You know, I had people that kind of listened to me speak and then kind of compared me to other clients, right? So it was like a competition. Right, like my depression isn't as severe as someone else's, so my depression is not valid. And this is coming like from mental health professionals, right? From psychologists and counselors and therapists. You know, I also had I just had a really like uphill battle, like encountering those sort of different types of support and therapy. So I ended up just kind of stopping, and CAMH was my very last resort because I thought that, you know, I'd find the same experience there. And in however, in that case, I didn't actually.
That's really good. That 7 months you spent just for yourself and taking care of yourself, I just really want you to reiterate how important that was, because I know when it comes to my mental health, once I'm out of the hospital, there's no working. Mm-hmm. There's no socializing with friends. Like, yeah. I'm deeply in a depression. I'm in my bed. I'm sleeping. I'm Netflixing. I'm not working on myself. So the fact that you took the time to I'm not initially doing that work for myself. So you took that time to do that work for yourself. And I just want you to kind of reiterate what that was like for you.
Yeah. You know, and I always tell people that it was like one of the best times of my life, right? I felt like I was like an all-inclusive kind of resort, right? With the same kind of feeling where, you know, you go to a resort somewhere and you feel like incredible, like everything is just there for you and there's, no troubles in the world, right? That same feeling I got when I was focusing on myself, right? And I was putting all those external pressures aside. I felt really good. It was the one time in my entire life that I didn't worry about what people thought about me. Didn't worry about any of the challenges of my life. I just found ways to do things that I enjoyed. And it meant doing things like drawing and coloring. Like prior to that time, I feel like the last time I like colored something was like when I was in elementary school. And, you know, like people think like, oh, well, drawing at the time, people told me like, that's not essential. Like, oh, you don't need to do that anymore. But when I, you know, just drew something or colored, like it just made me feel so incredible. I ended up when I got discharged from the hospital, it changed my whole outlook on life. You know, like prior to that, I was just working the grind, making money, paying bills, trying to like one up someone, be very competitive, very materialistic world that I was living in. And I realized like all of that stuff got me into that position that I was at the time, because I wasn't focusing on, to me, what I believe now are more impactful and meaningful things in life, like building relationships with people, pursuing like just hobbies that you like to do, if it's drawing or coloring, whatever it is, pursuing activities, recreational stuff. Those things to me are more important. And they're definitely above and beyond everything else. And I feel like, if you pursue those things, you're in a better position to go and pursue work and money and all of those other things, right? You feel more comfortable with yourself. But you know what I find now when I'm in positions where I kind of experience like a little slump in my mental health, my mental well-being, I realize it's the only reason why that happens is because I stopped pursuing any self-care. Right. The days where I'm not eating right, or I'm not sleeping right, or I'm not, going out in the community and just doing recreational things, my body ends up like telling me like, you're doing something wrong here. And I feel really bad about myself. And then I just give myself a reality check. Like, what kind of self-care stuff did I do this week? And usually the answer is like nothing when I'm feeling those symptoms. Right. So it's really important to me. It's really valuable. And I feel like every like young person and especially every like male young person in school, or just living at home with their family, like should have this stuff be valued as well, right? Mm-hmm.
So how did social services come into play? Because we left you off at going to university for biochemical, technical engineering.
Sure.
Whatever that statement was at the beginning. How did social services come into this? Like you've exhibited self-care. I'm assuming things are going well. You know, what's the next step for you?
Yeah, I find that like I went through all of that stuff for a reason, right? It wasn't fun, and it wasn't, I don't wish it upon anyone else, but I went through that for a reason. And I truly believe like a lot of good things came out of my experience with my mental health challenges, like going to the hospital, being pinned down in a stretcher and restrained, like all of that stuff like led to some good things in my life, even if it was like several years down the road. And one of those good things, I think, is just providing care and service to other people that are also hurting. So prior to that, I was always working in some sort of service environment, whether it was like youth organizations or community organizations, but leaving the hospital really grew my intrinsic like passion and motivation for that kind of work. And I tried to, and I still to this day take on like an advocate role, and support people that are, experiencing the same thing that I've experienced in the past. And I am better able to relate now, working in social services. I'm better able to relate with the challenges of trying to find a psychiatrist, or the challenges of like, medication, or the stigma that's out there. Also just being a male figure in general, the ethnic barriers as well, the cultural barriers, the religious barriers. I'm able to better relate with people, and I'm able to be more authentic and genuine with them. And I would have not had that feeling or that kind of vibe if I didn't go through it all myself. And so I truly believe, that people that go through this kind of journey, if they're able to do so, not everyone can, but if they're able to voice their story through like amazing resources and like examples like this podcast for example, they should be able to do that, because it helps a lot of people, and it's literally saving people's lives, and I get to do that through social services in a very genuine and authentic way.
Okay. Another question I had for you, this was about when you were seeking help once again. I just thought of it because it had left my brain, and now it's back in my brain. Yeah. So I'm going to ask it. Was it a part of it the cultural issue, not finding someone that you specifically as an Indian man could relate to? Was that a part of the the negative part of the process, I guess to say? Yeah,
definitely like one of the barriers for sure. A lot of the professionals that I saw at the time were female identifying individuals that were Caucasian. And I feel like I'd probably say like the first like 3 or 4 individuals that I encountered in the mental health services were Caucasian women, older women as well. And I found it was like very difficult for what I was sharing with them to be able to, for them to be able to like understand it, like truly understand it from my perspective. And it's tough. I mean, we can't understand everyone's like cultural backgrounds or whatever it may be, but that was definitely a challenge. I had to communicate, like for example, just communicating the struggle with being able to talk to my parents about mental health to someone who didn't understand, like not being able to talk to your parents. Right. Like, so, I've had a lot of people in my life that their parents were very much like a therapist themselves. Right. Or they were like almost like a very friendly individual. But that's not something that you see from Eastern parts of the world. Right. And certainly not from India. And getting a mental health professional to be able to understand that was, it was really tough. But also, aside from the cultural piece, like also seeing a lot of women like in the field, which I think is, for its own reasons, is really great. But when it comes to mental health, like men experience it in a different way. At least I certainly experienced it in a different way. And to be able to go out to the mental health sector, and just see like it being dominated, at least in my experience, by female practitioners, it was tough, right? It was tough for me to relate. And And I know, since my time like being in the hospital, I've encountered some amazing male individuals that are working in the field, and they're doing some really great work. But that wasn't my experience to start off with. So yeah, cultural background barriers, but also just gender based barriers as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
I often find that psychiatrists for me are male,
Right.
and counselors and psychologists are females.
Yeah, I feel like I agree with that. Yeah,
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. One last question, final question. Who is JJ today? Like, what do you do for your self-care? What do you do to make sure that you stay mentally well?
Yeah. I feel like, from years of like suppressing all of that kind of stuff, I'm still trying to figure out like what it is that I really enjoy doing. So right now I'm in a very like exploratory phase, like just trying to like figure out what are the things that I like doing. Ever since I got out of the hospital, I started to do a lot of running at the time. So I ended up just doing a lot of like races, right? Like 5K, 10K races. I wasn't really any good at it. I just did it for myself. I did it for the medals and stuff. It was like, I felt really like good about achieving something individually. I wasn't doing it as part of a team. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. It's just my own thing. I ended up doing like a half marathon, which is incredible.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And I never thought I would have done something like that. And again, like I may not have like had the best time like completing it, but I finally understood that I don't need to like impress someone else. It was just to do it for myself. So I did a lot of running, and I'm looking to get back into that now that we're getting into the summer. I also like to just do a lot of reading as well, like just specifically about people's journeys like in the mental health sector as well, just expanding my own horizon. And I find ways to like just be an advocate, right? So whether it's like teaching courses like that where we met on, or just talking to people, or getting involved in peer support groups, or finding ways to just kind of share my story. I feel like that's a big self-care piece for me as well. Just getting out there and like communicating what's on my mind and like what I went through. It's therapeutic in and of itself for me, for sure.
Okay. What's a book recommendation for us?
I think a book that comes to mind is it's called Option B. I think her name is Sheryl Sandberg, but she was or is like one of the executive people at Facebook. She had lost her went through a divorce, or someone had passed away in her life.
Her husband, wasn't it?
Right?
Yeah. Passed away suddenly, right? It was like something random.
Yeah, it was her husband passed away. Right. And she just like talked about like how shitty life was, right? Like at that time, and then things that she did to like kind of pull back from it, right? And I thought it was really well put, because it's someone in a position of influence and a position of power and fame that was able to share like stuff like that happens to
everybody,
to everyone, absolutely. But yeah, there are a ton of great resources out there that I just continue to try to find and explore.
Okay. Jared, do you have any other questions?
No, I'm good for today.
You're good for today?
You actually like, I'm sitting here and I'm like, I feel like a proud papa right now, because JJ, you don't know this, but Onika essentially asked all the questions that I would typically ask.
That's awesome.
Proud papa right over here.
So that was
hilarious.
That was a good moment. But that's it for me.
JR.
So
this is great. This
you.
is amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Is there anyone you want to give a shout out to before we sign off?
Yeah, well, first of all, just thank you for you guys like having me on here. Thank you for what you're doing. I feel like there isn't a ton of resources like this out there, and I think if you don't know it, I'm sure that you're also saving people's lives by what you're sharing on this platform, and you're adding support to people that really need it. So I'm really grateful for people like you that exist in our world, but also just a shout out to like everyone else that has had like a huge uphill battle like encountering the mental health system. And I know people like that exist. Like if you're in a position to tell your story as well, do so, because it just helps a lot of people that are struggling. So, yep, shout out to all those people.
Well, thank you, JJ. If you guys want to say hi to JJ, tell him how much you loved his story and how much you support him in his journey, his continued journey to wellness. Please JR. I was going to say JJ. Tell them how they can reach JR. Tell them how they can reach us, please.
Yeah, definitely. You can reach us at dysh, dysh, at daintydish.com. That's DAINTY, DYSH.com. Thank you so much for listening. We truly appreciate it. If you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts.
Give us a 5. You did a 5.
If you're listening to us on their platform, thank you so much. YouTube, SoundCloud, wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. We truly appreciate you. Thank you so much for your feedback and your support. That is it for me.
Thank you, JR. And that, ladies and gentlemen, has been the dish of the day. I hope you guys have yourselves a very, very, very happy hump day.